Welcome to The Budding Writer. This podcast offers an outlet for aspiring authors to showcase their original short stories or fan fiction one-shots. I'm your narrator, Shayna Armand. This is how it works. When you hear this sound, the story will begin, and when you hear it again, the story has ended. This episode, we are going to include not one, but two fan fiction stories from Star Trek. On September 8th, 1966, the first episode aired of a four-season TV show that began a worldwide cult following that produced numerous pictures and TV spin-offs. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the casting of Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Uhura, who had gone on to have the first on-screen mixed-race kiss, as well as being approached by NASA to help recruit some of the first African Americans to ever be in the space program. So sit back and enjoy these whimsical pieces by writers who are inspired by their fandom of Star Trek. Star Trek Star Chef by California Burrito, narrated by Shayna Armand. This week on Star Chef, in our season finale, our remaining two chefs, Chef Janeway from the Starship Voyager and Chef Picard from the Starship Enterprise, will prepare a drink that will dazzle the judges once and for all. With their drinks complete, it's now time for our judges to taste them. Who will win, Janeway or Picard? An ominous voice from above bellowed out. Chefs, you've had 30 minutes. It's time to see and smell what you've concocted, said Captain Jellicoe in a stern and authoritative voice. Chef Janeway, what have you made for us today? Erzy Dax said with a cheerful demeanor and big smile. Judges, what I've prepared today will blow your minds. It's coffee, but not just any other coffee. While in the Delta Quadrant, me and my crew cultivated and harvested coffee beans from local Trebayan farmers with fairly paid Kazon workers. There are no additives, no cream, no sugar, just delicious, organic Delta Quadrant coffee. As we said on Voyager, home is but 70,000 light years away, but there's still coffee right here. Judges, please enjoy, Chef Janeway said while making enthusiastic movements with her hands. Captain Jellicoe takes an eager sip and grimaces. Erzy takes a moment to smell the aroma of the coffee before happily drinking her cup. Spock, the judge who had until then remained silent, couldn't help but bellow out a disgusted grunt at the taste of the drink. The decision was clear to everyone in the room, yet the judges refrained from passing judgment just yet. Thank you, Chef Janeway. That was... Jellicoe paused as if he was visibly searching for the precise words to say. Coffee, all right. Jellicoe finally finished, but now with a disappointed look on his wrinkled face. Thank you, judges, Chef Janeway uttered out as she quickly retreated back. Chef Picard, please step forward, Spock said in a calm voice. The legendary Chef Picard of the Starship Enterprise stepped forward with a glistening plate of well-decorated china. In it was the drink that he was synonymous for. Judges, today I would like to share with you a family recipe, Earl Grey tea, passed down for generations. My family has, for centuries, grown tea from only the airy climate that the countryside of France could provide. We give attention to the plants from when they enter the earth until it enters our mouths. Please enjoy, Chef Picard said cheerfully while flashing a wide, diplomatic grin. The judges this time all took their time smelling the tea before drinking it. In a coordinated stroke, they downed their samples and gave a varied look, ranging from hidden disgust to plain contempt. Chef Picard, seeing this, wished his trusted Betty-Z wife was with him, so he may have swayed the judges' emotions. But he knew that they had caught on to this trick earlier in the season, so he dared not try again. That was... Jellicoe paused again. This time, though, the words came more naturally. Earl Grey tea. It was clear that Captain Jellicoe was not enthralled by the concoctions that the two remaining chefs had made. However, Erzy, ever the gleeful one, chimed in. That was a lovely cup of tea. Now it's time for us to give our verdict. Chef Janeway, please step forward. Before Chef Janeway could do as Erzy asked, Spock interrupted with a question, his inquisitive mind always working hard. Chef Picard, do you know that Earl Grey tea originated from the British Empire? Spock wondered in a deadpan tone. It's possible. It's a family recipe, Chef Picard retorted. Computer, from which country was Earl Grey tea invented in? Spock said. Earl Grey tea was invented in the British Empire in the year 1824, the computer replied. Agree to disagree, Chef Picard said with a soft smile on his face. Chef Picard had been through many trials and tribulations before, and he wasn't going to be fooled by Spock's facts and logic. The dumbfounded Spock retreated to his chair, not believing what he had just heard. Nonetheless, the other judges understood the cue and pressed on with the judging process. Chef Janeway, your coffee tasted great. Tell us what inspired you to make it for us today, Erzy said with another cheerful smile on her face. As we all know, being marooned in the Delta Quadrant sucked. But we embraced the suck. We had limited fuel, limited torpedoes, and unfortunately limited coffee. So early on we embarked on missions to fix that. I was reminded of that 7-year struggle when I rose slowly above the other chefs here, and that's what inspired me to create the Delta Quadrant coffee for you today, Chef Janeway said with a passion not seen in her eyes since she first set eyes on her life partner, 7 of 9. Teary-eyed, Erzy took a moment to collect herself. That's such a touching story, Chef Janeway. Thanks for sharing it with us. Now, unfortunately, we must decide which one of you will be the star chef, Erzy said, while wiping tears from her eyes. Captain Jellicoe, shifting in his seat uncomfortably, couldn't contain his resentment any longer. Chef Picard, your tea was putrid. Awful, just awful. How dare you belittle your ancestors with that? Chef Janeway, what you had given me to drink should be illegal. I don't understand it. It's hideous. It's dry. I don't understand it. I simply don't. That said, Chef Picard, your tea was less offensive and disgusting than Chef Janeway's. So congratulations are in order, I suppose, he barked out. Well, this is easy for me. I've always loved the Rakajino on DS9, so I'm going to have to give it to Chef Janeway. I really enjoyed your tea, too, though, Chef Picard. Very flavorful stuff, Erzy said, still excited as always. Spock, now the tiebreaker, sits calmly as he reflects on the two drinks. After a tense moment, he says, Chef Picard, your tea was like many of the other teas that I had tasted before. Chef Janeway, likewise, your coffee was merely coffee. But there was clearly more, love, in your creation than in Chef Picard's. Therefore, between the two unappetizing choices, I must say that your coffee was superior. You are the season's star chef. Oh my gosh! Can I take a moment to say thank you to my lovely partner, 7 of 9, and our many, many kids? Chef Janeway asked the judges, to which all of them shook their heads and signaled for the camera to fade out before she could attempt such an impossible task. Obviously, not only is our writer, California Burrito, a big fan of cooking shows, but also a big fan of Captain Janeway. And that is one of the great things about Star Trek. When The Next Generation started in the late 80s, they started to have a new series just about every 5 to 6 years. And so there is a perspective or favorite series of just about every generation for the last 30 years or so. In fact, one of the reasons I wanted to do that particular short story was I like both of those things as well, cooking TV shows and, of course, Star Trek. But I'm more of a The Next Generation gal, so I was like affronted that Picard would be considered a cheater with a Betty Z wife. But artistic license is one of the reasons fan fiction is so great, because the writer can take it anywhere and do anything. In the meantime, Why don't we go ahead and settle in for our second story, which is a little bit of a prequel involving the original series between Kirk and Spock. Embarkation Leave by Sheila Clark, narrated by Shana Armand. James T. Kirk, newly appointed captain of the USS Enterprise, sat in his room at Starbase One trying to read. It was the last day of his embarkation leave, the last day that he could depend on being left alone, and he had to take advantage of it. But to his disappointment, he found that he couldn't relax. He fidgeted restlessly, too excited to remain still. To be appointed to a starship already, after barely a year commanding a scout ship, was virtually unheard of, an honor he fully appreciated, even though in his more soul-searching moments he found himself wondering if he was really ready for such a responsibility, or if, one day, his youth and comparative lack of experience would catch up with him. To lose his command because of a stupid misjudgment, no. Starfleet Command considered him capable, therefore he must be capable. Firmly, he pushed the insipid doubt out of his conscious thought. It was impossible to sit still, and yet, somehow, he still did not feel like company. The thought of the Starbase's well-stocked recreational lounges did not appeal, even though he knew he would meet acquaintances there. One or two were jealous because of his rapid promotion, he knew, and he didn't feel like being diplomatic. Not even the thought of a drinking session with Gary Mitchell attracted him. He didn't want to join his new ship nursing a hangover. Often, he preferred flirting with the prettiest girls available, and while Kirk normally was not averse from joining him, on this day he didn't feel like that either. Today he wanted solitude. He knew, of course, that on the Enterprise he would inevitably be lonely, especially at first, until he learned which of his senior officers, apart from Mitchell, he could relax with in the knowledge that they would not take advantage. But that was not the same as the desire for aloneness he was experiencing today. On the ship, solitude would be a rare and therefore extra precious commodity. A ship's captain could expect to be on call 24 hours a day, even in his off-duty hours, if he had any pretensions to conscientiousness. A few moments' thought told Kirk what he really wanted to do. He had already paid a number of visits to the renowned wildlife park that formed part of the recreational facilities of Starbase One, and each time he had seen something new. It was primarily a nature reserve, initially built to conserve endangered species. The Federation had gathered a unique collection of rare and endangered species, both plant and animal, from a dozen worlds, carefully selected for compatibility. Creatures from many worlds lived together in harmony, providing a pattern for the intelligent life of those worlds, protected by a force field from the carnivorous species which lived in an excellent reconstruction of its native world. This walkabout area covered many acres where a man in search of peace could find it. Few bothered. Most Starfleet personnel enjoying leave here preferred to spend their time in the base's bars and lounges, and so Kirk knew that it was unlikely he would meet anyone. If he did, it would, in all probability, be someone whose mood was in harmony with his own. Visitors to the park normally wore neutrally colored clothes rather than uniform, in order to blend better with the background for fear of disturbing any of the more nervous species living here. Kirk quickly donned an inconspicuous brown shirt and trousers and headed for the park. No one ever walked briskly here. The place demanded a gentle stroll with frequent pauses to look at things. Kirk strolled and paused and looked and slowly started to relax, even though his mind still kept returning, of its own volition, to his new ship and to the short official file he had been given listing his officers. It told him so little: their names and ranks, their service career, nothing else. He wished it had been possible to talk to Chris Pike about them, find out what they were like as people. But he had seen Pike for only a few minutes in the Admiral's office, and that only by courtesy of the Admiral. Their appointments with him had been consecutive, Kirk arriving as Pike was about to leave, and the Admiral had chosen to let them meet. It had been long enough for an exchange of congratulations and good wishes, no more, and Pike was already away from the starbase before Kirk's interview with the Admiral was over. Now Kirk considered their names alphabetically as he had been given them. Mitchell, of course, he already knew, joining the ship as chief navigator with Kirk and at Kirk's special request. At least he would have one friend. But at the same time he knew, and knew that Mitchell knew, that he must still tread carefully where his old friend was concerned. It would be very easy to favor Mitchell over any of the others, and that he must not do. Piper, the chief medical officer, due to retire shortly, that was a pity. The ship's surgeon was the one man with whom the captain could always relax, since he was not in line of command. Any friendship formed with Piper would be of short duration, and he would have to start over with the new CMO. Better not to get too dependent on Piper's friendship. Scott, chief engineer, a long and distinguished career in space, he had been on board the Enterprise since she was launched. Kirk had met engineers like that before. Scott was probably too wrapped up in his engines to take much interest in people around him. Spock, serving both as first officer and as science officer, an unusual combination. He must be an unusual man. Spock, too, had been on the Enterprise for an unusually long time, 11 years. Most senior officers applied for transfer after several years if they weren't promoted. Perhaps his being science officer accounted for it. Just as few chief engineers ever moved up to captain, few science officers did either. Both groups seemed to prefer their specialties. Most captains have moved up through the ranks without specializing, getting experience in all branches of service. Kirk himself had served as helmsman, navigator, communications officer, and had also done a short stint in engineering. Sulu, chief helmsman, 3 years of service on the Enterprise. He might think of moving on soon, especially if men who were second and third in command of the Enterprise showed no sign of wanting to move up. On the other hand, if he had decided to specialize, Sulu was already as high up as he could go, short of applying for third in command elsewhere. Uhura, chief communications officer, joined the Enterprise straight from the Academy with last year's batch of trainees. Young, but must be very capable to be assigned to a starship and rise to CCO within a year. His mind not really on his surroundings, Kirk wandered on, barely conscious of, but yet appreciating, the myriad sounds and scents of the park. A Terran red squirrel scampered across his path and disappeared behind a tree from Altair 6. He barely saw it as he wondered which, if any, of his new officers would be able to call friend. His attention was abruptly recalled by the angry snarl in front of him. He stopped dead, freezing into immobility at the sight of the long white teeth of the tiger cat crouched there, tail tip twitching spasmodically. How had that got here? It should be safely held by a force field in the Barrison section. Slowly, cautiously, he began to back away, knowing that to turn would be fatal, as long as he kept facing it. But the Barrison tiger cat was hungry. It had escaped through a faulty force field many hours before, and had missed a meal, its keeper thinking that it was in its den when he failed to see it. None of the denizens of the park-walking area was large enough to provide it with a worthwhile meal. This two-legged creature, so like the ones who normally fed it, would feed it now. It began to pad forward. Attack is the best form of defense, Kirk thought. He glanced around, saw a short branch lying there, and picked it up with a quick movement. Then he yelled and sprang towards the tiger cat, stick raised. Hunger lent the beast courage. It leapt. At the last moment, Kirk ducked and the tiger cat overshot him. He whirled to keep facing it, guessing that the same trick wouldn't work twice. But perhaps it wouldn't need to. Someone was coming up behind the tiger cat at a run. A figure wearing dark gray. But unless the newcomer had a weapon of some kind, the cat crouched to leap again, its attention fully fixed on Kirk. The man approaching reached the cat before it had time to move and jumped onto its back. Kirk immediately moved forward to help, but his assistance wasn't needed. Long fingers found a spot on the creature's neck and it rolled over, limp. Kirk drew a long breath as he looked at his rescuer, a Vulcan, to judge from the pointed ears and sloping eyebrows. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's some trick you've got." "A simple nerve pinch," the Vulcan replied. "The animal will be unconscious for only a few minutes. I suggest that we use those minutes to leave its vicinity." "We must report it," Kirk commented. "Of course," the Vulcan agreed. As they started off back towards the base buildings, he continued, "I am surprised that anyone else should be in the park." "Especially a human, eh?" Kirk laughed. "I've been to it several times during my leave. It's a very restful place, usually." "Yes, restful indeed. I have also found it most instructive. There are a number of species there that I have not had the opportunity to study in their own environment. I think there are some that are extinct now on their own planets, Kirk said with regret. 4 species, to my knowledge, the Vulcan agreed. They finished the walk in silence, neither feeling any need to break it. After they had reported the presence of the tiger cat in the walking area, Kirk glanced at the Vulcan. He still did not feel like company, and yet the alien's presence was restful. Would you care to join me for a meal? He asked diffidently, wondering how a Vulcan would react to such an invitation. Vulcans were normally very reserved, he knew. I would be honored. They went to a quiet part of the base, away from the hubbub of the main lounges. The Vulcan selected a vegetable dish, and Kirk, recalling then that Vulcans were vegetarians, rapidly revised his own selection without much regret for a steak he had originally planned to order, chose cheese. The Vulcan glanced at Kirk. Permit me to select a drink for us, he murmured. Vulcans don't drink alcohol, Kirk remembered. Yes, of course, he said. The drink, when it came, was a delicate green color, which a human would not normally have considered looking drinkable at all. Kirk sipped it a little cautiously, then more enthusiastically. You like it? The Vulcan asked. Indeed, yes, Kirk replied. It is not well known throughout the Federation, the Vulcan explained. Although most star bases carry a small supply for visiting Vulcans, we regard it as much as humans regard champagne. It's better than any champagne I've ever tasted, Kirk replied cheerfully. And I can guarantee that no matter how much you drink, it will not give you a hangover, I believe is the expression. Kirk smiled. Good. They spoke quietly over their meal, exchanging thoughts on several subjects and finding themselves remarkably in accord. Finally, over coffee, the Vulcan seemed to sigh. I have enjoyed our meal, he said. Unfortunately, I am due back on duty shortly and must go now. It's been nice meeting you, Kirk replied, and thanks again. We'll maybe meet again. Indeed, I hope so. The Vulcan inclined his head gracefully and walked away. Kirk returned to his room, realizing as he went that somehow he and the Vulcan had never got around to exchanging names. Pity. However, the man had a face it would be easy to recognize. They would surely meet again. He slept badly that night, tensing up again at the thought of joining his ship. His ship. The thought sang in his mind. It seemed both too long and too short a time before he headed for the base's transporter room, wearing dress uniform. His gear would be beamed up for him. That was one thing he no longer needed to worry about. It seemed that he no sooner straightened his shoulders than he was materializing on board the Enterprise. He looked towards his senior officers gathered to meet him, wondering if they were as nervous as he. Recognition was immediate and mutual. As Kirk stared at the tall, slim Vulcan in dress blue, he felt an idiotic grin dawning, and although the calm face regarding him remained unaltered, he was sure he saw an answering gleam of something that was a combination of welcome and pleasure. At the same time, Kirk had the instinctive feeling that to mention last night just yet would embarrass the Vulcan, and he was unwilling to risk the friendship that had, he was sure, begun by causing embarrassment. He stepped down towards his officers. The Vulcan spoke. Spock, first officer, sir. Lieutenant Commander Scott, Lieutenant Commander Piper, Lieutenant Sulu, Lieutenant Uhura, Lieutenant Mitchell, I believe you already know. Kirk saw from Mitchell's face that he believed he was the main recipient of the captain's broad grin. Yes, Mr. Spock, gentlemen, Miss Uhura. She's a great ship, Captain, Mitchell laughed. You're going to like her. Kirk chuckled, glad that Gary used the more formal address. Time enough for informality later. Speaks the expert. How long have you been aboard, Mr. Mitchell? Nearly an hour, Mitchell boasted. Kirk could have swore he saw an answering, appreciative gleam in Spock's eye as he answered solemnly. Since Mr. Spock and Mr. Scott have both served aboard the Enterprise for a considerable time, I think you must be right. Give me your opinion again when you've served 11 years on her. Would you care to see your quarters, sir? Spock asked. Please, Mr. Spock, gentlemen, Miss Uhura, I'll see you again later. As he walked down the corridor at Spock's side, Kirk remembered something that had been said last night. Here, without anyone to hear, he could mention it. We'll be able to test each other's chess skill after all, Mr. Spock. Wouldn't you prefer Mr. Mitchell's company in your off-duty time, Captain? The voice was quiet, even, yet it held a note of wistfulness. Gary doesn't play chess. Besides, I enjoyed our conversation last night. I'd like to talk with you again. I would be honored, Captain. The name's Jim, Kirk said hopefully. The Vulcan hesitated for a moment. You honor me, Jim. For myself, Spock is my given name. My family name. Since no non-Vulcan can pronounce it properly, I find it easier not to use it off-world. Kirk sensed that he had been given a confidence not frequently offered. I see. They turned into the cabin assigned to the captain. Thank you, Spock, for everything. They looked at each other, feeling again the affinity that had touched them the evening before. Then Kirk said quietly, It's going to be a good 5 years. I have to say, one of the reasons I chose Embarkation Leave was for its simplicity. The fact that it focused on the actual spark of friendship that was created between Spock and Kirk, that we see so many times in the TV show as well as in the movies, an enduring friendship, almost like a bromance. God, that's a terrible word. Never mind. Now, if you'd like to hear more from our writers, they're actually both on archiveofourown.org. Star Chef was written by California Burrito, and that is their username they chose to use. And the other writer for Embarkation Leave is actually Sheila Clark, also known as username Blue Wolf 458. They are available with multiple stories for you to enjoy. That is archiveofourown.org. If you're a reader of fan fiction and have a really good story you'd like to recommend or an author, please shoot me an email at thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. That's thebuddingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. I want to give also all of you fanfic lovers a heads up. There's going to be a new podcast out by one of my associates called Fanfic Maverick, where they talk about everything fan fiction. Thank you for being with us today, and I hope you will join us every Friday for new stories from new writers. If you're a writer yourself and would be interested in having one of your stories read on our podcast, please go to our website, www.thebuddingwriterpodcast.com, and check out our specifications. My name is Shayna Armin, and this was The Budding Writer. Until next time, I hope all your stories have happy endings.